Guess who's back, bitches? The voice crack fucked that up. Ah. Fuck. Ah. Look like a fucking scene kid. Yo, who the fuck is MattCMG? Hey everybody, it me, MattCMG, and welcome to a new episode of Internet Idiocracy Mini, where instead of taking a deep dive into one big topic like we usually do, we take a more relaxed approach to a smaller topic. Now for those of you who are literate in the audience, you know, those of you with a functional fucking frontal lobe, you've already read the title, so my hot take of the day is that the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, kind of ruined movies. Now, I don't hate the MCU or anything like that. In fact, I actually want to preface this video by saying that I do genuinely like the MCU, or at least the concept of it. You know, I haven't seen every Marvel movie or anything like that, but I think that it's fucking brilliant the way they built this universe up over the course of like a decade, where each hero gets their own solo movie, and then all of them culminate into these big team-up crossover movies. The events of each film affect the events of the other films in some ways, and that's really cool for like the really attentive fans. Like the entire plot of Spider-Man Homecoming is based on something that happened like 5 years earlier in the first Avengers movie. Like that's kind of cool. You know, it makes these movies feel connected. You know, it makes the universe feel real and tangible. But alongside the fact that there's a connected universe, you don't necessarily need to know everything about it. Like these movies can still stand on their own. For example, I went into Avengers Endgame having only seen the first 3 Avengers movies, the 2 Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and Spider-Man, and that's it. And I still thought it was a great film that really capped off this decade of stories and characters really well, with Spider-Man Far From Home serving as a nice epilogue, even though I hadn't seen most of the prior movies. You know, I guess my point here is that I like the MCU. I think the MCU is cool. I do not have a problem with the MCU itself. My problem is more so with how the MCU has affected the movie industry in general in what so far have been mostly negative ways. Firstly, while the MCU wasn't the first cinematic universe out there, it was the one that popularized the idea. After Avengers came out, it seemed like every movie studio wanted to make their own cinematic universe, and I can't think of a single one that actually succeeded. The closest anyone ever came was the DCEU, which, you know, I think we all know how that turned out. The DC Expanded Universe seemed like they were really rushing to compete with Marvel, which is why most of their movies from this time came out so bad. The MCU worked because each major character got their own solo movie before crossing over. After one solo movie, DC just kind of went straight for the crossovers. They kind of skipped the part where you need to establish the characters. They didn't bother to establish their characters before putting them all together, which is, I think, a pretty important reason for why Batman v Superman and Justice League were so hated. You know, aside from the fact that they're just bad movies. Ever since the MCU hype died down after Endgame, it seems like DC has learned their lesson and aren't really keen on making their own cinematic universe anymore. Right now, they're more focused on just making movies without any regard to how they'll connect with each other, which is why movies like Shazam and Joker were so well received. The DCEU is kind of a tragic tale since DC has many extremely interesting characters that haven't yet gotten their time to shine due to Warner Brothers chasing after the MCU success and rushing out bad movies. But the superhero genre isn't the only one affected by the MCU's influence. Y'all remember Universal's Dark Universe? That's the fucking most obscure shit I have ever said in a fucking video, I think. After the Mummy reboot in 2017, Universal had plans to make an entire cinematic universe by taking all the classic movie monsters that they had the rights to and updating them to the modern day into a cinematic universe. How would that even work, right? You have like monster movie Avengers, like fucking Monster Mash, the crossover, like the fuck? Planned for this universe were Dracula Untold, the Mummy reboot, The Invisible Man, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Frankenstein, Creature from the Black Lagoon, and some other odds and ends in there as well. After Dracula Untold and The Mummy were poorly received and didn't make as much at the box office as they would have hoped, the entire universe was effectively canceled, and everything planned for the universe was reworked to be its own thing. Clearly, this decision turned out to be for the better, since The Invisible Man was very well received as a standalone film. This is yet another example of a studio trying to essentially copy the MCU. You know, I don't like to say, oh, but they copied them, but let's be real, that's literally what this is. Like, they saw that having your movies connected made more people want to watch them, but didn't take into account that the being connected part likely was not the biggest reason for its success. But hey, we can't let all the other companies have all the fun, as now Disney are taking after themselves with their 10 new Star Wars TV shows. It seems like they're trying to recapture that lightning in a bottle that they had with the MCU and applying it to Star Wars, but what they didn't realize was that Star Wars was already this big expanded universe. Not necessarily a cinematic one, but they're still trying to really capitalize on that idea by throwing as much shit at the wall as they can and seeing what's gonna stick. You know, I am definitely not the only one who's only interested in like 2 or 3 of these new shows out of like the fucking 11 of them that they have or something like that. The MCU is even guilty of this. You know, Endgame was such a great conclusion to the universe, but they keep just trying to revive it with a million new shows that nobody really gives a shit about, and Star Wars is kind of the same. What the fuck said you could turn off, you stupid fucking slut? fuck you. Fuck you, Crazy Frog Thanos. These, of course, aren't the only examples of, like, failed cinematic universes, but I guess my point here is that the MCU tricked a lot of studios into thinking that making a cinematic universe is the way to go, and that ended up severely hurting what could have been a lot of great movies. You know, like, if DC had taken their time and done a Batman movie, a Flash movie, a Wonder Woman movie, an Aquaman movie, tried their hand at Green Lantern again, all before even attempting to cross them over, then we could have gotten a really cool Justice League movie, but they rushed it out without much thought just to compete with Marvel. And it ended up being a complete fucking stinker. The lesson that a lot of these studios seem to learn is that there can be a time and a place for a cinematic universe. There are ways to do it right, but that oftentimes these self-contained, standalone stories end up working much better than a film whose sole purpose was to set up and connect to other movies that haven't even been made yet. Another negative byproduct of the MCU is that it's created major superhero fatigue. At this point, most people seem to be sick and tired of superheroes because there's been so much superhero shit coming out over the years. You know, Marvel at their peak was coming out with like 2, sometimes even 3 MCU films a year, and then combined with the other countless superhero movies coming out at the same time, trying to directly compete with them, then we have a genre that is massively oversaturated. A lot of the more generic MCU movies have also shed light on the fact that many of these types of superhero stories are exactly the same. You know, they take the most basic plot structure they can find and then they just change the character. Like, let me ask you if this sounds familiar, right? You know, hero has a tragic childhood, they grow up and have a pretty boring adult life. You know, they get superpowers and get wrapped up in some evil scheme, but they learn the true meaning of being a hero and save the day. End credit scene, that's the fucking movie. This describes almost every single recent superhero movie on a base level. That's not to say that's a bad plot structure or anything, or that it's bad storytelling. Quite the contrary. You know, this same plot structure has been used for decades, and if you have an interesting enough spin on it, you can have a really great story. Personally, I think of these Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies. It's not that it's a bad plot structure, it's that you see it over and over and over again, and they don't try very hard to make you forget that you're watching the same story again, so it feels really fucking stale and really fucking repetitive, because it is really fucking repetitive. The MCU indirectly caused this, and it makes it hard to watch their future stuff since you know that it's kind of going to be the same origin story told again with a different character. That's not to say that you can't make good superhero stories anymore. You know, in fact, I think, you know, The Boys is a good example of a unique spin on the genre, but for better or for worse, we've identified the formula, and their attempts to rectify that could backfire in the future.
You see, when they're apart, they're absolute fucking rubbish. But you put them together, they're the goddamn fucking Spice Girls.
The biggest problem with the MCU, in my opinion, is that they're popular movies, right? And that's not a bad thing. You know, these movies are popular for a reason. But it's because of the immense popularity and sheer quantity of these movies that some people only watch Marvel movies. They only watch superhero movies, and as a result, we have a bunch of people whose knowledge of movies in general is based solely on the MCU. You know, I like to call these people pseudo film bros because they're a bunch of dudes, you know, typically, who see movies like Infinity War or Endgame and think that they're like the pinnacle of cinema when there are significantly better movies that exist out there. You know, it's fine if your favorite movie is like a Marvel movie or something, right? That's perfectly fine. Nobody's trying to take that away from you, but you cannot possibly tell me that Infinity War or whatever is like fine cinema when movies like Pulp Fiction or The Godfather or 2001: A Space Odyssey exist. That's not to say Marvel movies can't be good or meaningful. In fact, I think that Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and 2 are great films with meaningful themes under the guise of a goofy space movie, but they are not on par with some of the best like films of all time. That's just fucking asinine to me. Film bros see like a fucking wide shot in a Marvel movie and think that they're like experts on cinematography. You're like, if the best shot you've ever seen in a movie is the one with the most colors, then you're not an expert on cinematography. You just like the shot with the pretty colors. Wide shots with pretty colors don't mean the cinematography's good. You know, I want y'all to look up right now Avengers Endgame video essay on YouTube, right? And count how many people claim that it's like the best movie of all time or is a cinematic masterpiece, like completely fucking unironically. Like, yeah, sure, the movie's good. It's kind of it's a technical marvel what they were able to achieve with all the CG and shit. But let's slow the fuck down here, right? Let's calm the fuck down. At the end of the day, if you like Marvel movies, that's completely fine. You know, I like Marvel movies. They're fun movies. I get it. But you cannot possibly convince me that the MCU and its prevalence has not had some unforeseen consequences on the movie industry. You know, we've got creative freedom being stifled in favor of making two movies connect to each other when they really fucking shouldn't. Superhero fatigue across the board, and an unhealthy amount of people who unironically think that a movie where dudes in tights beat up a purple man is peak cinema. Film bros need to fucking stay wildin', that's all I'm saying. But that's all I really have for y'all today. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. Do you like the MCU? Do you hate it? What are your thoughts? Subscribe to this channel to join the fucking Matt Pack. I'm calling you guys the Matt Pack now because that's fucking really gay. Consider pledging to my Patreon to support content like this. I've been MattCMG, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can. Spins a web any size, catches thieves just like flies. Look out, here comes the Spider-Man. Is he strong? Listen, bud, he's got radioactive blood. Can he swing from a thread? Take a look overhead. There goes the Spider-Man. In the chill of night, at the scene of a crime, like a streak of light, he arrives just in time. Spider-Man, Spider-Man, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Wealth and fame, he's ignored. Action is his reward to him. Life is a great big bang up. Wherever there's a hang up, you'll find the Spider-Man. Spider-Man. Like and subscribe or I'll fucking web you.